What are the life cycles for the different species of deer we have in Australia? When a fawn's born, what is the relationship between a fawn and its mother? When does it join a herd or go solo? What is a bachelor herd? When do mature stags cast their antlers, and how does their behaviour change during the rut? And when is the rut? All of these questions I'm going to answer and more. Timestamps below if you want to jump to any particular deer species and want to learn more about them. Otherwise, my name's Chris Waters the Huntsman. Let's get to it. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the life cycles for various species of deer we have in Australia and how an understanding of these natural processes can help you become a more successful deer hunter. Now, at some point, I'm going to take about 20 seconds to quickly spruik the best hunting club in Australia, but apart from that, it's all deer. Now, one caveat before I get into this, where possible, I've tried to highlight how each deer species differs in terms of their behaviour, biology, and breeding seasons, as well as location-specific information. However, we are talking about natural systems here, which tend to bend, move, and change. So with that in mind, some facts may differ for different regions or under unique circumstances that you may be used to. That is to say, this video is designed to give you a broad understanding of Australian deer and their life cycles. It's not a rigorous scientific doctorate. So keyboard warriors, just calm down and, maybe spare your comments. All right, let's get started. Let's start with birth. In Victoria and South Australia, deer births rarely occur before the first week of November, and most calves or fawns, you can use either word interchangeably, are born between the first 2 weeks of December. Now, although their breeding season rarely begins before mid-March in these southern states, and that's mainly in response to decreasing day length, anecdotal evidence suggests that mating and subsequent calving can begin up to 3 weeks earlier in places like southern Queensland. Now, when they do give birth, female deer, and they're called does or hinds depending on their species, generally give birth away from the herd. They will select an area of dense vegetation so that the fawn can be hidden from predators. The mother will lick the fawn clean of the birthing fluids that serve to disguise its scent, which is another protective measure, and the mother will then urge the fawn to its feet, and in less than 20 minutes from the point of birth, you can find fawns standing up and taking their first steps, which is pretty incredible. For the first week of its life, the fawn will remain hidden in the vegetation while its mother feeds it, and the female returns regularly to suckle the fawn with milk. After a week or so, when it's strong enough, the fawn will then join the herd. Females occasionally have twins, and a deer giving birth to triplets is not unheard of, but it's highly irregular, and most deer have a single fawn. Alright, here's our first hunting consideration. During this period of the fawn's life, it cannot survive without its mother. So any maternal does or hinds that are shot will ultimately result in the fawn's death too. So this is something that you need to consider when hunting during the months of November and December, and make up your own mind regarding the ethics of it and whether you should shoot or not shoot a doe or a hind in this period. So moving on to the first year of life, the fawn will generally stay with its mother for approximately 1 year, depending on the species, suckling for about 3 to 4 months. Sambar hinds have been known to keep its offspring for around 2 years sometimes, but for most deer, a single year beside mum is fairly standard. Speaking of Sambar fawns will begin to eat solid food from 15 to 14 days and ruminate, that is, chew the cud, once they are 27 to 35 days old. Now, more generally, female deer of most species will break the maternal bond with its fawn by driving off that juvenile just prior to giving birth to next year's fawn. At this point, the deer is independent. Next up, we have joining the herd, bachelor herds, or the solitary deer. For those deer species that live in herds, the female will usually live their entire lives in the same herd, mating with the dominant male every year. However, sometimes the herd may be broken up during fights between rival males. Now, young males will often stay with the herd, and when the timing is right, try to challenge the dominant male for breeding rights. Now, the rules of the challenge are pretty simple. The winner stays with the herd and maintains the breeding rights, and the loser is driven off and needs to find its own herd or roam as a lone stag, which some species actually do just by their very nature. Now, it should be noted that young males will often leave the herd without challenging the alpha stag. That happens too, and that's basically if they deem the challenge too dangerous. Other species of deer, like Sambar, who tend to be more solitary by nature, will move widely among breeding territories from a young age, seeking other deer to court. Sambar can, however, form small herds, generally no more than 6 members, with a single male within it, but it's not always the case. After leaving its mother at 12 to 24 months, it's not uncommon to find a juvenile or sexually immature, but not always, male deer congregating together in what are called bachelor herds. Bachelor herds are thought to provide useful protection for young male deer against more established herd competition or aggressive dominant stags. This arrangement may be long-term and stable or short-term until the male deer finds its own harem of female deer ready to lead. When living in bachelor herds, stags are generally not aggressive towards each other and rarely fight or seek out dominance displays. It's not until the breeding season comes around that starts to change, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, before we get into talking about mature stags, antler growth, and some tips on how you can hunt them effectively, let me take 20 seconds out to tell you about Australia's best hunting club and why it's a great community that you'll want to join. Hunting Trips Australia has the best hunting club in the country, as well as your stock standard inclusions like public liability, hunting insurance, and genuine reason to own a firearm. Membership also includes awesome perks like monthly hunting product giveaways, bi-monthly guided hunt giveaways, hunting product and course discounts, weekly early access to the Huntsman videos, an exclusive invitation to the annual camp, and a bunch more. So get your butt over to huntingtrips.com.au/membership and join Australia's best hunting club. I'll see you there. Okay, so we're back. Let's talk about mature stags. Young stags around 1 year old are often called spikers, and this is due to the small nubs of antler that are starting to form and grow from around the 4 to 5 months of age. Now, stags must feed a lot to receive the nutrition necessary to grow these antlers. How much food a deer eats can directly contribute to the size of its antlers. During this growth period, clover is a popular form of food for stags to help grow their antlers, and this actually results in a change in their poo. Stags' poos that are eating clover tend to stick together and clump together. So this can be a great way to help track stags if you find poo like this. Now, speaking of antler development, providing a degree of thermal protection as well as carrying nutrients and oxygen to the newly growing antlers, an initial soft layer of hairy skin covers the growing bone. It looks a little bit like fur and it's known as velvet. So if you see a stag with fuzzy antlers, that deer is said to be in velvet. A full-size set of antlers on a large stag takes about 15 to 16 weeks to form, after which time the bloodsome part of that bone is actually cut off and the velvet dies back and is rubbed off on a tree, on a trunk, or overhanging branches. Whilst the old velvet is present, the deer is said to be in tatters. Once all the velvet has been rubbed off, underneath you will see the hard, strong bone, which is now the new antlers, which can be used for challenging other stags. Here's another hunting consideration. Of Australia's 6 deer species, 4, that is Sambar, Rusa, red and fallow deer, make what are called rutting scrapes, rutting stands, or rubs during their respective breeding seasons. Identifying these scrapes can be incredibly useful in helping you track and hunt mature stags. Each species performs this task differently and the resulting damage to the foliage is unique, making it easy to identify. But the basic idea is that a stag will find a tree, a branch, or patch of saplings or overhanging vegetation and thrash his antlers against it. This often results in the stag churning up the ground with his hoofs around the area too. Now, the 3 main characteristics of a tree rub are as follows. Firstly, there's wood shavings at the base of the tree, and we have torn bark in the middle, and then clear shallow cuts at the top of the tree caused by the tips of the antlers. Now, the purpose of these rubs are threefold. Firstly, to help remove any velvet from their antlers. Secondly, to mark their territory and ward off any potential rivals, and this is often referred to as a signpost in the case of Sambar deer. Or thirdly, to advertise their presence to cycling females through the spreading of their scent. Now, this is done through the secretion of fluid via their preorbital glands, which they then rub onto the tree. Now, rutting scrapes are a predominant feature in Sambar country, usually in close association with wallows. Scrapes are almost invariably on a gentle slope below a single hanging tree or fern, and unlike a fallow buck's rut, Sambar rut scrapes are generally quite shallow and unlikely to form large indentations. Another feature of a Sambar rut that makes it pretty obvious is the presence of mud that's been scraped onto the tree as well, coming off a stag who's recently wallowed. So here's another consideration that can help you track down stags. It is common for Sambar, red deer, and Rusa to wallow. A wallow is a muddy hole with water in it and has lots of tracks around it. Often indents or scrapes made by legs and antlers will be present as well. Wallows can vary in size and typically a couple of meters across and perhaps 30 to 40 centimeters deep. Now, deer wallows are a part of a breeding strategy. The stags roll around in the wet depression and urinate on themselves and in the wallow and rub their scent glands, faces, and antlers on the surrounding soil. And in the process, they mix their scents and pheromones in the wallow and at the same time coat themselves with mud and odors. This causes the stags that have recently wallowed to have a really unique musty smell, which is instantly recognizable to the savvy hunter if you know what it smells like. So if you're out there hunting and you smell a musky scent like a wet dog, stop, listen, and slow down to a crawl, because paying attention to the wind and the area around you will help you track down this stag. You're probably within 100 meters of a stag. It also pays to mark down on your maps any wallows that you find out there in the bush, or to choose to stake them out to see if anyone comes along. This can be another great way to track down stags. Now, seasonally, or after a specific period of time, stags' antlers will actually fall off and will start the process of regrowing again. So here's some information on when specific species of deer shed their antlers. Most Rusa stags cast their antlers in January or February. Sambar, it's generally accepted that most wild Sambar stags will cast within a 12-month time frame from when they began their antler growth. They might hold them for a couple of extra weeks or even a month, or possibly cast a little short of that 12-month period, but they typically follow this routine throughout their lives. It isn't an even distribution when Sambar stags actually go into hard antler throughout the year, and that's probably a greater percentage of males that cast in October, November, and December and January than any other time of the year. One of the reasons a lot of Sambar stags cast over spring and summer is that the best feed is available at this time of the year, and for the stag to grow the largest set of antlers he possibly can, he'll need to be eating and focusing on food sources when they're at their peak. So casting in spring also helps the Sambar stags with increasing their body mass after a lean, strenuous winter when grass and plant growth is at its slowest and the stags have been travelling many kilometres on the search for cycling hinds. Also, the majority of female Sambar will be receptive to mating at this time of the year, which is why many Sambars across the range are in hard antler from May to October. Fallow stags will generally cast their antlers in October and regrow them by February. The size of a stag's antlers will increase up until about the age of 11 years old when he passes out of his prime and antler size actually starts decreasing. Similarly, red stags tend to cast in October/November and regrow by February. Chital deer are a strange one. Chital stags will actually eat their shed antlers if their diet is lacking the vitamins and materials, so it's hard to know exactly when they shed them. Making things even more difficult, young chital stags shed their antlers every year, while older animals may keep theirs for up to 4 years at a time. Generally speaking, chital stags shed their antlers soon after the rut. Similarly, hog deer antlers may be cast between August and October, generally after they have bred. Okay, let's talk about sex. Let's talk about the rut, the roar, and deer breeding. Some deer mate during a specific season, while others mate intermittently throughout the year. Common names for periods in which deer breed seasonally are called the rut or the roar, because some species of male deer can actually become quite vocal during this period in an attempt to attract female deer. Males can be extremely aggressive during the rut, and there have been reports and stories shared amongst the old campfire or two of stags actually attacking hunters during this period, so be careful. Male stags reach sexual prime maturity at around 16 months old. However, spiker yearlings can be successful in mating before this period. It's just unlikely as most of the female deer are courted and protected by older males. Now, fertility for most deer peaks around 8 to 13 years old. While stags older than 13 years continue to produce semen, they just seem to show less rutting behaviour. Stags are presumed to be sexually active and fertile while they're in hard antler stage only, and matings are equally frequent at both day and night. In terms of changes of behaviour, during the breeding season, a stag's behaviour can change in a number of ways depending on their species. These include things like antler rubbing or thrashing, vocal calls, we're talking about bugling, roaring, honking or croaking, wallowing, a noticeable increase in rapid heart rate, dominance displays, urine splashing or spraying, and sparring. Here's another hunting tip for you that relates directly to stags. So during a specific deer species breeding season, the stags are considerably easier to hunt. Here's some reasons why. So if you see a doe or a hind during this period, don't take the shot immediately. If you wait a minute or two, you'll often find a stag or a spiker hot on her heels trying to mate with her. If you're interested in a stag, that's a great way to shoot one. A stag's location can also be given away during this period because of their loud bark, croak, or bugle, or roar. Be sure to keep an ear out for the distinctive sounds each species makes, and I actually have a separate video detailing this, so you'll find a link above if you want to go head over to that. Australian deer species that tend to be more vocal are red deer, sambar, rusa, and fallow. Now, a final tip for you that during the rut, you can often call stags in using a deer caller, which imitates the call of a doe or a hind. This technique isn't as successful at other times of the year, but it is successful because obviously stags are looking for doe. So if you make the sound of a doe, stags will come looking for you. Okay, so closing off the sex talk, here is a breakdown of each deer species' mating periods. Red deer breeding occurs mainly in April. The beginning of the rutting season for males is obvious as a stag's voice shows characteristic changes of a deep-throated roar. Chital breeding is non-seasonal, but in Australia, most chital rut between June and July. Stags are often in hard antler in the first half of the year, and calves are born in the second half of the year.
Rusa rutting may take place at any time of the year, but the tendency is from June to October, and during the rut, Rusa stags will actually plough the vegetation and amass bundles of greenery on their antlers. Most fawns are born in March and April, and in good seasonal conditions, hinds may produce 3 to 4 calves in 2 years. Rusa deer can breed all year round and usually produce 1 calf between March and April, with the exception of the Javan Rusa deer, who are apparently fertile all year round. They're observed under Queensland farming conditions to be strongly seasonal in both reproduction and antler cycling, so field observations show that a majority of mature Javan hind calf between March and May. Hog deer reproduce irregularly, however calves are most frequently seen between August and October. Sambar stag can be in rut at any time of the year, as a hind can be in season any time of the year. This means Sambar stags are always roaming looking for their next partner. And finally, the fallow rut often begins between mid to late March or early April. It's tough to pin it down into exact date, but it often coincides with the first big cold spell of the season. So if you're mid to late March and you feel a cold morning coming on, well, that's probably the start of the fallow rut. Alright, so we've arrived at the final stage of a deer's life cycle, and that is death. So in the wild, deer can live up to 20 years old. However, few reach that age, as older deer invariably fall prey to predators, mostly hunters, wild dogs, or dingoes, or they succumb to sickness. And that's pretty much the end of most deer's lives.
So I hope you found this video interesting, entertaining, enlightening, and got something out of it on the various life cycles of Australian deer. Now, if you haven't gone out and checked out those 2 videos that I mentioned during this one on Australian deer species and where you can find them, I'll link to that below, as well as different stag calls for the different species. Both those videos are well worth a watch, and I'll link to them. Otherwise, if you haven't gone out and checked out Hunting Trips Australia Hunting Club, go do that. Go join the hunting club. It's great to be part of a hunting club. This is a fantastic hunting club. It's a hunting club that I made, so I'm invested in it. But it will connect you to a great community and give you great access to benefits. So encourage you to go do that. Otherwise, hopefully you can get out for a hunt soon. Share some stories and comment below on this video what you thought about it. Any suggestions for future videos. Love you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.